Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook. Wife Moon Goddess, I teach her to develop civilization. Chapter 11. Is this really what Chiangwei did? In front of Count Ignatz's castle, the other nobles who participated in the pursuit were a little unbelievable when they saw the castle that had been moved to only the frame. They were not surprised when Princess Rose attacked Count Ignatz's castle. But after Princess Rose attacked Count Ignatz's castle, she actually moved the castle empty. Even the marble wall tiles and floor tiles were pried off. Damn it. That's a little outrageous. After all, Princess Rose is a noble princess with a good education. She has been well dressed and well fed since she was a child, and is the pearl of the entire Plantagenet kingdom. How could she do such a thing? What's more, Princess Rose has even given up her grandfather's larger, stronger and more luxurious castle, so how can she value Count Ignatz's castle? Chiangwei probably didn't do it. Send someone to investigate. I want to know who did this. Count Ignatz was furious. It just so happened that Dajan needed a rest. If he didn't figure this out and find out the culprit, he wouldn't even be able to eat. Your Excellency, there is someone who knows the situation, but he wants 100 gold coins before he will tell you. Soon, Count Ignatz received the report. Several soldiers came with a man who was a well-known gangster nearby. This guy, in order to get more money when other civilians were keeping secret, chose to sell the news at a good price. Chief Ibai had already expected this situation. People's hearts are unpredictable, and it is impossible for everyone to be of the same mind. No matter at any time, there will always be people who have their own little calculations. Promise him. Count Ignatz's eyes showed murderous intent and he hummed softly. When the ruffian saw that Count Ignatz had agreed, he was immediately happy and started talking quickly. What? Chiangwei actually gave my land to those untouchables. However, as soon as the ruffian said a few words, Count Ignatz jumped up in a rage. He also pulled out his sword with a swish sound, frightening the ruffian. Count, calm down, calm down. The surrounding nobles advised him one after another. Count Ignatz forced himself to calm down. Keep talking. The ruffian then continued speaking tremblingly. At this point, Count Ignatz couldn't hold himself any longer. Because, according to the ruffian's story, his castle was emptied out by those untouchables who were extremely lowly in his eyes. Although, it was also the decree issued by Princess Chiangwei. But these untouchables dared to empty his castle and divide his land. Who gave them the courage? A down-and-out princess who even turned into a bereaved dog. These untouchables. Count Ignatz was furious, and with a fierce swing of the sword in his hand, he chopped off the ruffian's head. This ruffian never imagined that Count Ignatz, who had a very good reputation in the past and was always known for his integrity and abiding by the spirit of the contract, would actually break his promise. Not only did he break his promise, Count Ignatz also took out his anger on him. Someone, go and catch those untouchables. Count Ignatz called on his warriors. He also borrowed some warriors from other nobles. A vigorous arrest began. Soon, thousands of civilians in the open space outside the castle who were still immersed in the joy of owning their own land were captured again. When surrounded by tens of thousands of cavalry and seeing Count Ignatz, the expressions of all the civilians changed drastically. I consider myself to be kind to you, but I didn't expect that you would dare to betray me. Do you deserve to own my land? Do you dare to enter my castle? Count Ignatz held a long sword and looked at many civilians angrily. At this time, he even wanted to kill all these civilians. But if he really kills them all, there will be no one left in his territory. Whoever enters the castle first must come out by himself, otherwise, I will kill one every 10 seconds. Count Ignatz suppressed his anger and said. No one spoke. Puff. Seeing this, Count Ignatz waved the long sword in his hand, and a head flew up, and a corpse fell heavily to the ground. Father! A little girl cried hysterically. All the civilians glared at Count Ignatz. Count Ignatz was stimulated by the looks of these civilians, and swung his sword fiercely, killing an old woman. Untouchables, if you don't come out, I will kill you all. Count Ignatz said coldly. It's me. At this time, a man stood up despite his friend's dissuasion. Very well. Hang him and hang his body for a month to show you untouchables the consequences of resistance. For the rest of you, you are required to hand over all your belongings within 1 day. As for the land, you are not worthy. Have. Count Ignatz finally calmed down and did not kill too much. He looked at the many civilians coldly and spoke again. As a punishment for you, each of you must be hungry for more than 3 days. During these 3 days, you are only allowed to drink water. Report, we got information from the north. The castles of Viscount Lane, Earl of Dornay and more than a dozen nobles were attacked. According to the information we got, Princess Rose issued a decree in Yorkshire to abolish all the nobles who participated in the rebellion will also distribute the nobles' land to all the common people. Before Count Ignatz finished speaking, the spies who went to get information reported the latest information. Each of these spies carried 3 horses, which was much faster than the large army. What? At this time, many nobles were shocked. Crazy, Chiangwei has been driven crazy by us, she actually wants to abolish the nobility. Haha, what a big joke, what is she going to do to abolish them? These useless commoners. Immediately, a noble laughed. In his opinion, these civilians have nothing to fear. Although the civilians were able to move the treasures happily before, now Count Ignatz's words will make the civilians return them obediently. These civilians are born to be oppressed. The nobleman didn't notice at all when he laughed. The anger hidden deep in the eyes of some civilians. Once that anger is concentrated, it can form a huge tsunami that can drown everything. Bullets are already flying. I didn't expect Chiangwei to make such a stupid move. She is digging her own grave. Originally, as long as she surrendered, we could allow her to be a princess. Now, I'm afraid many nobles want to send her to the gallows. Other nobles also started talking about it. In their opinion, this was the last act of madness performed by Chiangwei after being forced into a desperate situation. These nobles were not worried. They hold a powerful and elite army. Even if Chiangwei divides the land and lets the civilians rob the wealth in the castle, these civilians will not be afraid. Just like Count Ignatz now, if you kill a few, other civilians will obey out of fear. Count Ignatz, we can't let her continue to act like this. We've almost rested and we must continue to pursue Chiangwei. Will you come with us or stay here? Asked a noble. The other nobles whose castles were breached could no longer wait. I'll take care of things here first, and then I'll chase you. Count Ignatz said. Okay, let's go first. The nobles set sail again with tens of thousands of cavalry. Before setting off, they sent out a small group of cavalry to carry back the news from Yorkshire. Some nobles also released carrier pigeons. It is not that easy to communicate using homing pigeons. Homing pigeons follow fixed routes and communicate mainly by recognizing places. Some magicians also cultivated some smarter birds, but there were no magicians in the castles of the nobles before. There are also magicians who have some more advanced magical communication methods, but these nobles do not have that kind of magicians. Even if a small number of carrier pigeons fly out, it is impossible for these carrier pigeons to automatically search for the noble coalition. The noble cavalry moved again, and at the same time, a large number of spies were released by them, trying to capture the trajectory and location of Chiangwei's army, so that encirclement and suppression can be carried out. The noble cavalry has come after us. When the noble cavalry took action again, in the north, in a castle that had just been captured, the voice of Princess Rose rang out. How do you know? Chi Fibai asked. I just received a revelation from the goddess when I was praying. The goddess learned about it when other devout believers prayed. Princess Rose said. Oh. Hearing Princess Rose's words, Chi Fibai was overjoyed subconsciously. Doesn't this mean that the moon goddess is awake? Although the moon goddess has given Ticini some authority over the projection of her godhead, projection is a projection, and Ticini cannot bypass the moon goddess and directly give Princess Rose inspiration. Any influence from the world of gods to the continent of gods requires divine power. And divine power is now so precious to the moon goddess. Immediately, Chi Fibai realized that the moon goddess might not only be awake, but might also be paying attention to the Plantagenet kingdom. This made Chi Fibai even more motivated. He decided to let his wife take a good look. How powerful is her man? The nobles came to pursue only the cavalry. Chi Fibai asked. Princess Chiangwei nodded. Probably, even with a large army, it is impossible to be that fast. It is possible that Jasmine will lead them further back. Chi Fibai pondered for a few seconds and shook his head. Jasmine will not come. If my guess is correct, she will go back and ascend the throne. Enthrone. The expressions of Princess Rose and Ticini in the kingdom of God changed at the same time. Goddess, if Jasmine takes the throne, then Rose will be a rebel. Ticini realized the power of Jasmine's move. After the overall situation was decided, Jasmine ascended the throne with the support of the nobles, then she was the legitimate king. Even if she launched a coup. But what does that matter? No one cares about losers. History is always written by the victors. There must be the Holy Spirit coming to Jasmine's side to make suggestions, I don't know who it is. Ticini murmured. In the castle, Princess Rose also realized this. Your Majesty, the envoy of God, what should we do now? Princess Rose asked. Chi Phoebe looked down at the civilians who were carrying treasures from the castle, and said calmly, in this case, let her not be able to ascend the throne with peace of mind, so first destroy this cavalry. Destroy. This is impossible. This is impossible. The words of Princess Rose and Ticini sounded almost at the same time. Princess Chiangwei decided to remind Chi Phoebe, Your Majesty the Divine Envoy, this cavalry is at least 50,000, and we only have more than 15,000. You send your men to other counties to spread your decree. Chi Phoebe did not answer Princess Rose's words, but looked at Princess Rose and said, Good. Princess Chiangwei nodded. She was already used to Chi Phoebe's way of speaking. Then, we divide our troops into 2 groups. You take 10,000 people and continue north to attack the castles of those nobles. Leave the remaining 5,000 people to me. Chi Phoebe said. Divide the troops. Princess Chiangwei was a little reluctant when she heard these 2 words, because without Chi Phoebe around, she would often be confused and not know what to do. By the way, can the goddess hear you just by praying to her? Chi Phoebe asked. Yes, but the goddess will also listen selectively. You are the envoy of God, and the goddess will definitely listen to your prayers. Princess Rose said. Then how will the goddess give revelation? Chi Phoebe asked again. Princess Chiangwei felt strange that a divine messenger didn't know this. But she didn't think too much and said, the goddess's revelation will bring blessings to the soul, but the goddess generally does not give revelation casually. Of course it won't be casual. It takes a lot of divine power to reveal it. Chi Phoebe understood. He took out a map of York County. The map was relatively rudimentary, but he could still get a rough idea. In the next few days, you attack along this line. You have more horses and the pursuers cannot catch up with you. Don't fight them head on. Wait for my notification. If necessary, I will let the goddess give you enlightenment. Quote. Chi Phoebe spoke in detail. Princess Chiangwei listened very carefully. Now she has no idea of her own. If Chi Phoebe doesn't arrange it, she will be particularly confused. After talking for more than an hour and explaining some precautions, Chi Phoebe finally set off. He took 5,000 people with him and rushed southward in a mighty manner under the cover of night. What is he going to do? In the kingdom of God, Ticini's beautiful eyes widened and she looked curiously. As Chi Phoebe left, Chi Phoebe also disappeared from the screen. The moon goddess used her divine power to create this scene through Princess Rose, which was only limited to Princess Rose's surroundings. Furthermore, the moon goddess places certain limitations within the godhead. In some private moments of Princess Rose, such as when taking a bath, the screen will automatically move away. For other believers, it is difficult for the moon goddess to do so when the other party is not praying. In the entire Plantagenet kingdom, Princess Rose is currently the only one who can actively observe the moon goddess around her when she is not praying. Although Chi Phoebe has that relationship with the moon goddess cannot yet observe the situation around Chi Phoebe. Therefore, Chi Phoebe's departure is equivalent to losing contact. Ticini had cheered up. She must hear Chi Phoebe's prayers when he prays. Ticini, what are you going to do, Your Excellency Phoebe? He only has 5,000 men. It will be very dangerous if he harasses the noble cavalry. A Holy Spirit couldn't help but become worried when he saw Chi Phoebe disappearing from the screen. Your Excellency Phoebe will not be so impulsive. Ticini was also a little worried. At the same time, she couldn't figure out how Chi Phoebe could use 15,000 men to deal with more than 50,000 cavalry. Those cavalry are not bad in equipment. They are all wearing armor and fully armed. There are also many heavy cavalry inside. Although all of the 15,000 people around Princess Rose have horses, there are only a few thousand who can be called cavalry. There is even less heavy cavalry. Moreover, this army abandoned a lot of heavy equipment for the sake of speed. The speed is indeed fast, but not to mention a head-on confrontation with more than 50,000 cavalry, even a hedging with an equal number of cavalry, it will be finished. Does it mean that he is going to use those civilians now? However, the civilians in Earl Ignatz's territory have been suppressed. As the nobles' troops march up, other civilians will lose their fighting spirit. Even if there are still civilians with him, the number not enough. Ticini thought. Through the help of some believers in Count Ignatz's territory, Ticini already knew about Count Ignatz's bloody suppression. Now, all the civilians are obediently handing over the treasures they had moved away before. Not only that, these civilians will be gathered together by Count Ignatz and fasted for 3 days as punishment. The civilians did not resist. What Ticini was worried about happened. The nobles were too powerful, and the common people were just common people after all. However, Chi Fibai's words, "Let the bullets fly for a while," also gave Ticini a vague hope. She has not completely lost confidence. While Ticini was racking her brains to think of a solution for Chi Fibai, she also listened to the believers' prayers with concentration, so that she could be the first to find out when Chi Fibai was praying. This is also her important work as the Holy Spirit. Even if the moon goddess was not injured, she would not be able to listen to prayers all the time. However, she waited a whole day and night and did not hear Chi Fibai's prayer. Where did he go? Ticini was a little worried. Night falls. In front of Count Ignatz's castle, the lights were still bright. The castle was filled with treasures brought back by the common people. Lord Earl, please let my mother have a bite of food, she can't hold it any longer. Some civilians knelt down and pleaded with Count Ignatz. These civilians have not eaten for a day and a night. They can only drink water for a day and a night, and they are all very hungry. Count Ignatz was stern and ignored the civilians' pleas. These untouchables cannot survive without hunger for 3 days and 3 nights, and they will not have long memories. My lord, the other things are back, but I haven't seen any weapons in the arsenal. At this time, a subordinate reported. Arms. Count Ignatz's eyes swept over the civilians. These untouchables don't have the guts to hide their weapons. They were probably raided by Chiangwei. You and your people will watch here and let them leave after 2 more days of starvation. After Count Ignatz finished speaking, he was ready to go back to sleep. Early tomorrow morning, he will lead people to catch up with the large army. Boom. Suddenly, the ground shook. Immediately afterwards, the sound of horse hooves sounded. It seems like thousands of horses are galloping. Count Ignatz looked back and saw that not far away, a large number of torches were measured, densely packed, forming a torrent, rushing over. Not good. Although he didn't know who the other party was, Count Ignatz subconsciously sensed that something was wrong. Enter the castle and prepare for battle. Count Ignatz shouted. However, it was too late. Count Ignatz's soldiers were still scattered in all directions. Before any of them could react, the army that had quietly lurked nearby had already rushed over. It's Her Majesty's flag. Her Majesty is here to save us. Some civilians saw the flag of the army and shouted excitedly. Rose. Count Ignatz was horrified. He did not expect that Princess Rose would actually turn around and go around to the southernmost part of York County to attack him. Boom. A large number of cavalry rushed over, and a group of Count Ignatz's soldiers were killed before they could react. Come into the castle. Count Ignatz took his personal guards and fled into the castle in panic. Want to use the castle for defense. Outside, Count Ignatz's other men were also fleeing inside. Close the door. As soon as they entered the castle, Count Ignatz issued an order. Lord Earl, there are still many people outside. A knight said, I'll lock you up if I ask you to, or you'll die if you don't. Count Ignatz suddenly pulled out his sword and said ferociously. Close the door. The knight had to close the door. Other soldiers moved a lot of things over and blocked the city gate. Outside, the 5,000 people brought by Chi Fibai had completely charged over. Count Ignatz does not have many men here, only 1,000 men. Facing the army brought by Chi Fibai, he is completely vulnerable. Everyone come together. A civilian shouted, and many civilians joined the fight. Count Ignatz stood on the city wall, his face turned livid as he watched all of his men outside being killed. However, after the invading army killed all Count Ignatz's soldiers, they did not attack immediately. Instead, they were collecting weapons and equipment from the slain soldiers. Count Ignatz's soldiers are very well equipped. A knight is often equipped with a big sword, a short sword, and a dagger. These weapons were quickly collected together and thrown into the open space in front of the castle. Surrounded by dense crowds of civilians. I want to see Chiangwei. Count Ignatz came to the top of the city wall and shouted. But no one paid any attention to him. Finally, the open space in front of the castle was filled with weapons. Count Ignatz didn't know what the other party was going to do. Even after he called several times, Princess Rose didn't show up. At this time, a tall man in white riding a horse came to the pile of weapons. Each person has a sword, and come with me to take down this castle. The man in white shouted loudly. Let me see who dares to hold a sword. If you hold a sword, wait for the army to come and kill you. Count Ignatz shouted. It was a good thing that he didn't shout. When he shouted, a civilian stood up with hatred in his eyes and picked up a sword from the ground. With the first, there is the second and the third. You. Count Ignatz's eyes were full of anger. But his anger is of no use at all. More civilians picked up swords from the ground, and soon, more than 1,000 weapons on the ground were all in the hands of civilians. Sword in hand, follow me. The man in white shouted and rushed towards the castle. Immediately afterwards, all the soldiers, as well as civilians, rushed forward like a tide. I want to see Chiangwei. You untouchables have no right to touch me. Half an hour later, Count Ignatz's shout rang out in front of the castle. This castle has already been breached once, and it would not be difficult to breach it again. However, no one paid any attention to him. Another soldier thought he was too noisy and blocked his mouth. In front of him, a gallows has been set up. When Count Ignatz saw the gallows, his expression changed drastically. He finally realized what he was facing. This is not his fault. Not killing nobles is already a tradition in many kingdoms. Even if nobles commit crimes, they will receive minimal punishment. Count Ignatz did not expect that the other party would be so crazy. He was to be hanged in public. He is a count. Hanging an earl in public would shock all the nobles. He struggled desperately, but to no avail. Several civilians had picked him up and carried him to the gallows. The surrounding civilians all cheered. Count Ignatz finally experienced the feeling of despair, and then, in this despair, surrounded by what he regarded as untouchables, he was sent to the gallows. Long live the goddess! Long live the king! Seeing Count Ignatz being hanged, all the civilians cheered as if they had achieved a huge victory. Take your weapons and go to Viscount Lane's territory. This battle is not only for the queen, but also for yourselves. I will wait for you there early tomorrow morning. Immediately, Chi Fibai shouted loudly, led his soldiers, and set off again. The civilians who had replenished their food, many with firm eyes, set off with weapons. Many people here signed up early to join Princess Rose's army. Most of these people were assigned weapons, armor, and horses from Count Ignatz's men. There are also many people who made their decision after experiencing Count Ignatz's suppression. Some civilians returned home and dug out the weapons they had hidden before. Some civilians prepared their own simple weapons and headed to the territory of another noble. There, Viscount Lane is also punishing the civilians in the territory. The nobles from Yorkshire were the main force in this pursuit, because they were most familiar with Yorkshire. When they found that their castles had been evacuated and their lands were distributed to civilians, these nobles naturally chose to temporarily leave the army and deal with matters in their own territories first. Anyway, the main force is very large. Even if they are temporarily separated, it will not affect the combat effectiveness of the main force. There are a full 60,000 cavalry. Even if only 1/3 is left, it is not something that Princess Rose's army can contend with. Long live the goddess! Under the night, outside Viscount Lane's castle, the cheers of the civilians also sounded. As for Viscount Lane, he has become a corpse on the gallows. Rest where you are. After capturing 2 nobles in one night, Chi Fibai gave the order to rest in place. Both humans and horses need rest. Early the next morning, a large number of civilians from the territory of Earl Ignatz had gathered outside Viscount Lane's castle. There were a lot of these civilians, plus the civilians who took up arms outside Viscount Lane's castle. Their total number has exceeded 4,000 people. This is just the beginning. After hanging the nobles in public, these civilians had no way out. Even if there is a way out, many civilians don't want to retreat anymore. They want land. They don't want to be bullied unscrupulously by these nobles anymore. When a person has nothing, he can endure poverty and oppression. But one day, this person had enjoyed the taste of wealth, but was suddenly deprived of it again. The resistance begins. Where there is oppression, there is resistance. If not, either the oppression is not severe enough, or people cannot see hope and do not know what kind of life and world they can get after resisting. But now, Chi Fibai let them see it. Set off. After Chi Fibai gave these civilians a new destination, he set off again with 5,000 people. Long live. In front of a castle, civilians cheered. Another noble was sent to the gallows. Take your weapons. Before sunset the day after tomorrow, the Queen hopes to see you in Starfall Valley outside Yorkshire. A female officer spoke loudly to many civilians. York City, the largest city in York County, is also where the governor's palace is located. However, the current governor of Yorkshire, Marquis Laurent, is not in York City. Instead, he returned to the royal city with Princess Jasmine to support Princess Jasmine's ascension to the throne. Now that the overall situation has been decided, the ministers and officials in important positions in the royal city have no choice but to support Princess Jasmine. Without force as a guarantee, power is empty. That should be enough time. Chi Fei counted the time in vain and whispered. Now, 3 days have passed since he and Princess Rose separated. In the past 3 days, Chi Fibai swept away the nobles who stayed to suppress the common people. There were already more than a dozen nobles who were hanged by him. More and more civilians have been assigned weapons. Driven by these civilians, more civilians joined in, making the snowball grow bigger and bigger. As for Princess Rose, Chi Fibai was not worried. Princess Rose's 10,000 people were traveling in a simple carriage and were not easily caught. Moreover, Princess Rose now has the right time, place and people. Her team included a large number of local Yorkshire civilians. These civilians knew the roads and knew which road was closest and best to take. The cavalry is indeed powerful, but the cavalry cannot go all the way. At this time, it is very important to have someone who knows the way. Since the civilians were facing Princess Rose, the noble cavalry could not get any information from the civilians. This point is very important. It was impossible for Princess Rose's army to pass by without being noticed. If the civilians answered truthfully, the noble cavalry could pursue them very accurately. But now, those civilians either said they didn't know, or pointed out some wrong routes, making it difficult for the nobles to pursue them. And Chi Fibai was attacking the nobles who stayed to suppress the common people along the way, but the news did not leak out, and it would be difficult to leak it. The commoners naturally know, but will they tell the nobles' army? Even if someone wanted to tip off, the nobles' pursuit troops were so fast and their location was unknown, so there was no way for these people to tip off. The time that Chi Fei calculated in vain was the time for Princess Rose to march according to the route he gave. And the time for Princess Jasmine to return to the royal city. If Princess Jasmine kept things simple, she would be almost back to the royal city by now. However, after returning to the royal city, Princess Jasmine cannot ascend the throne immediately. She still has to make some preparations for ascending the throne. No matter what, she will have a few days of preparation time. If the king ascends the throne in normal times, it will take at least 1 or 2 months to prepare. It is also necessary to notify some countries with good relations in advance so that the other party can send envoys to come. Princess Jasmine's ascension to the throne this time seems to be a time grab. Many procedures will be omitted, but it cannot be too simple. So, time is enough. Chi Fibai led his army and left here again. Rushed to the next battlefield. Here, the civilians who picked up the swords spontaneously prepared dry food and began to go to York City in groups. Where are you guys going? When a long line of civilians passed through a small town, they attracted the attention of the people in the town. York City, the rebels are chasing the king. We must gather in York City to help the king defeat the rebels. A commoner said with a sword on his back. I heard that as long as you join the army, you can get 6 acres of land and enjoy half the tax, is that right? In the small town, a man in his 20s asked. Of course, not only that, as long as we defeat the rebels, we will no longer have to be oppressed by the nobles in the future. The common man said with his sword on his back. Wait for me, I'll go too. The man immediately went home, picked up a hatchet and followed him. I also need to go. Other people were also moved. They had heard about this decree a long time ago and were somewhat ready to take action. However, this town was relatively remote and there was no one to take the lead, so no one took action. Now, seeing so many civilians want to go, other civilians will follow suit. Under this situation, the group of civilians heading to York City became larger and larger. People follow the crowd. If you ask him to go out to fight alone, he may not dare, but if there are hundreds or thousands, he will have the courage. What's more, there are huge benefits. Falling Star Valley. Another day passed, and this morning, Chief Ebi took his men and horses to a canyon. This is Falling Star Valley. Falling Star Valley is located outside York, the largest city in Yorkshire, and is the only way to York. This canyon is very long, but the canyon is so wide and flat that there is no fortress set up here. At this time, Luoxing Valley was already crowded with people. It was densely packed with civilians gathered everywhere. There were more civilians arriving than Chief Ebi expected. These civilians were all over the mountains and everywhere. They brought their own dry food and all of them carried weapons. These weapons were handed down from the ones Chief Ebi had captured from the nobles. Have your own. There were also a large number of civilians carrying long wooden poles on their backs, because Chief Ebi had been ordered to do so before. This is a powerful weapon against cavalry. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.